Welcome to our next webinar as part of the DevLab webinar series. No Cap, You're Hired, What Employers Really Look For. We are very, very excited to have you join us and to hear from our panelists today. But before we get into that, I'm just going to go over some introduction slides. So for our agenda for today, I'm going to be going over some tech considerations and as well as acknowledgements and gratitudes. We're going to then turn it over to Sarah to go through what DevLab and to share some data that's been coming out of DevLab. We're going to then turn it over to our panelists. And Sarah has a couple of questions prepared for them as well. They're each going to present and answer a couple questions. And then we're going to open it up to you all attending here to ask some questions as well. And then we're going to talk about next steps with the DevLab. So just to start, I would love to know if you're comfortable sharing in the chat here where you're calling in from. We had over, I think, 190 registrants for this series, and right now we have 30 participants, and I think more and more people are joining. So if you are comfortable sharing where you're calling in from, that would be amazing. Regardless of where we're calling in from Indigenous land. I personally am calling in from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many First Nations, First Peoples, sorry, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We also would like to acknowledge and remember those who came here as settlers, especially those who came here involuntarily, those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay these acknowledgements to honor those people and to pay gratitude for how they have built the cities that we live in and have stewarded this land for so long, for so many years. And when I think about young people, I see young people at the forefront of so many movements around stewarding land, around creating a better future for themselves and for young people who are going to come after them. And so I'm really excited to be supporting this series and to be learning about the ways that we can support young people through with workforce employment efforts. Our last webinar was on the green economies, all of these different ways that young people can be supported to move themselves forward towards a future that they really want. So thank you all for being here for this. A couple of tech considerations. Just so folks know, we're going to be sending you a link after this webinar with the recording of the webinar, as well as the tools and resources that are mentioned on this webinar. So you'll get that shortly afterwards. If you want to interact with anything that the panelists are speaking about, we encourage you to use the chat function in Zoom to react and engage with the panelists. But if you have specific questions that you want to post to the panelists, please use the Q&A panel. You should see it at the bottom of your screen. And if you don't, in Zoom, there should be a little circle with ellipses in it, and it says more underneath that button. So if you hit that button, you should be able to find the Q&A panel there. So please put all of your put all of your questions into the Q&A panel. And if folks are seeing questions that really resonate with them, please upvote those questions. And Sarah will make sure that we get to them in the open Q&A section. If you need any tech support, feel free to send us a message. And we usually find that if you're having a hard time connecting, exiting the call and then rejoining often will do the trick there. Lastly, we do want to acknowledge that by participating here, you are committing to creating a respectful virtual space with the learners that are here. So by participating in this event, you agree to participate with openness and respect for all. And I'll turn it over to Sarah now.
Thank you, Orpa, for this introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited for our webinar today. So like Orpa mentioned, this is part of a series that is looking into how do we support more dynamic, engaged, and vital young workforces. We've had a range of topics so far looking into different sectors, such as the green economy, entrepreneurship, but we also looked more closely at the skills that young people need these days to be able to advance in their careers or even progress and find jobs such as AI and digital skills. Today, we wanted to shift a little bit the perspective and look on the other side, what's happening with the employment side, on the employer side, companies, organizations, but also trying to understand what are the challenges that are being encountered by young people, what are some of the experiences, but also hear from very insightful people on perspective coming from the other side, whether from leaders, from recruiters, from employers, from people who provide services. So I feel today is going to be a very interesting conversation. And this is part of the DevLab project, which is in collaboration with Tamarack Institute and is funded through the National Essential Skills Program, also known as Skills for Success, by Employment and Social Development Canada. And it's really the ultimate aim of this project was to develop a dynamic, engaged, and vital young workforce. This is what DEV actually stands for. So moving on to the next slide. So this project had a research component. So we did engage with a lot of young people across Canada. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, this project was looking into different changes that happen in the work ecosystem post-pandemic, trying to understand the lived realities and experiences of young people across Canada. So we had surveys, conversations, we even developed some indices. But in addition to that, we didn't just want to identify the challenges and the needs. We wanted to also bring those back to the communities we worked with. So we had solution summits held in different cities across Canada, community events that were focused on specific topics such as livability within the city, such as public transit, financial literacy, digital literacy, the green economy. This enabled us to really support youth-led solutions across Canada. We were able to reach over 10,000 people through our data stories, so really bringing back this data to communities so that you can engage with it and see what type of patterns and stories are coming out of it. We also had a lot of data that we showcase on our Youth Data Lab, which is a platform that you can all access. It's open and free. You just have to create an account, and then you get to see all the data that we have in a visual manner. You can interact with it. There's even a chat bot that enables you to ask your own questions and to see what is currently happening in Canada in terms of the work ecosystem. What are the skills that are needed these days to actually thrive? What are some of the challenges across cities, and what areas actually need improvement? Which cities are deemed the best to work in for young people? Which cities are the most affordable? All of this information is accessible to you on the Youth Data Lab. So for today's topic, we're actually, as I mentioned before, we're looking at a different perspective. We want to have a closer look on what are the new realities when it comes to work in Canada? What are the changes? What are the patterns? So looking into our data, we wanted to see how do youth want to work these days? Because we've heard a lot of information in the media. We read a lot about some constraints, some tensions between employers and young employees, people not able to find jobs. The youth unemployment rate is increasing. So we wanted to understand what is behind all of that. So first of all, similarly to all people, young people actually prioritize their financial freedom and well-being. So this is something that was very clear from the research we conducted. But in addition to that, they actually want a work modality that offers flexibility in scheduling and work location. So if you look at the graph that we're showcasing here, contrary to what we know usually in narratives that are being kind of circulated, young people do not mind working from the office, even if we look across age groups. This ranges from like 3 to almost 4 days a week being in the office. However, what they value is to have the flexibility when it comes to deciding which days and hours they could actually be physically present in the office. It also matters the location of the office, because a lot of young people reported that they spend a lot of time commuting, and this is related to them not being able to afford living close by to their work, because a lot of the jobs are in downtowns, and considering the housing affordability issues, young people cannot afford to live close by, so they have to commute for long hours. So this is not just a financial constraint for them because commuting is costly, but it's also a time constraint. So that's why they prefer to work remotely or in a hybrid mode, or to have the choice to pick a location from which they can work. But in addition to that, looking at some of the behaviors of young people and attitudes toward work, 54% actually reported that they would leave their role after 6 months for a better opportunity or culture. So this is also in contrast to what we call organizational loyalty, where usually people would stick around for 2 years before they consider changing their roles. However, with the youth that were part of this research, and here we're talking about more than 1,500 young people across Canada, they said that they would actually leave their roles for a better opportunity. So here we're talking about better compensation, more benefits, more support, and culture. So here we're gonna dig deeper into organizational culture and leadership and the policies that these organizations are advancing. In addition to that, we found that 1 in 2 youth find hustle culture to be toxic and unsustainable. Many of you are aware that these days, a lot of young people, even not young people, have to work more than one job, have to do different side jobs in order to sustain themselves financially. And this is leading to mental kind of breakdown. It's leading to burnout because it's part of this hustle culture where you need to be doing so many things in order to also advance professionally and to acquire skills that are much needed. But this is actually backfiring on a lot of young people because it's affecting their mental health. And looking more closely at some of the conversations we had, and here I want to mention that the young people that were involved in this research aged from 16 up to 30 years old. So we did have a range of age brackets, and these experiences obviously vary depending on which life stage you're in. But some of the testimonies we got is that youth are expected to know everything, be technical experts, and be able to coach older colleagues. So there is this perception now, because young people are more educated than ever, that even when they're applying for an entry-level job, they're supposed to know everything. They're supposed to already have experience, which is sometimes not the case because you just graduated. So technically you still haven't acquired an experience, but it's still being asked for when you're even at an entry level. In addition to that, because they're perceived to be tech savvy and more digitally inclined, they're expected to know anything that has to do with technical skills, but also coach their older colleagues. So there's also an intergenerational tension that is emerging from that. In addition to this, one of the testimonies we got is that at a new job, I expect the manager to clearly communicate my roles and responsibilities. I don't want them to assume I understand my scope. That's the biggest miscommunication, and the goalposts keep changing. So a lot of the expectations now on young people is that they should know what they sign up for from the onset. There isn't proper onboarding, there isn't proper support being provided. So many of them land a job and then get disappointed that it wasn't actually what they thought it was, or there isn't clarity in their roles and responsibilities, or for cost-cutting reasons, they find themselves taking on more responsibilities and taking on a different role that wasn't exactly what they anticipated, or there's a miscommunication. So this also relates back to the type of leadership in an organization and the type of work culture that's there. So now, if we want to zoom in more on the organizational culture and young people and how they consider an organization to be youthful. And when we say youthful, it's kind of attractive for young people. So they definitely want an organization that values stability. So here we're talking not only financial stability, but also stability in terms of work commitment, long-term employment, benefits, an organization that has openness. So there's an open culture, transparency in decision-making and leadership, and then connectedness, where there's proper teamwork, there's proper kind of support provided. And looking more closely at what are the most attractive qualities versus the least attractive qualities, and I don't think these are going to be surprising to anyone, but the most attractive qualities are high salaries and wages, obviously, because with the affordability crisis increasing over time, young people want to be better compensated, but they also want to have more flexibility in work. They want to have good benefits, increased paid time off, and a focus on well-being and mental health. On the other side, when we look at the least attractive qualities, it wasn't actually inadequate pay and benefit that was the highest. It was actually poor leadership. So this is an eye-opener on how much leadership can actually influence perceptions of an organization and how much it could actually attract or deter young people from pursuing roles or staying loyal to that organization. In addition to bullying and harassment, unreasonable expectations and long hours. So a lot of this is related to the work culture, and then comes inadequate pay and benefits, identity-based discrimination. So even one of the professionals we talked to in Calgary, so this is not even a young person talking, employers are expecting more productivity with less resources these days. And it's causing burnout, and not just within the people, but in the whole ecosystem of work. And this resonates with what I mentioned earlier, with the hustle culture and with the expectations of cost cutting, where young people find themselves taking on more responsibility, but they're not being fairly compensated for that. So this was just like a snapshot of some of the research findings that we found from this project through the data collection and research we did, but also through the conversations we had at the summits and community events. And that's why I'm so happy today to host three amazing panelists who are going to bring very different perspectives about the topics that I raised, but also other patterns that we're observing in the work ecosystem. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our three panelists for today. So our first panelist is Sally Diab. Sally is an ICF certified executive coach, and she's also an EQ practitioner and the founder of Cultivate and Scale Coaching. Sally helps leaders to strengthen clarity, presence, and impact in complex environments through structured, outcome-driven, and empathetic coaching. Sally has worked across different sectors like banking, government, consulting, energy, technology, entrepreneurship, and across different countries. So she really brings this very holistic experience to the table and will bring forward the perspectives of leaders and what's happening at that level. Our second panelist for today is Katisha Myers, who's an employment program coordinator at Elizabeth Fry Toronto. Katisha works really close with equity-deserving communities, supporting them in accessing job opportunities, training, and career support through inclusive programming and community building. Katisha was also my colleague at Youthful City, so I'm really happy to have you with us today, Katisha. And last but not least is Lulwa Haidar, who is a talent acquisition operations manager at Lightspeed. Lulwa has over 6 years of experience across agency and in-house recruitment. She's really passionate about helping young people navigate their early career path through inclusive hiring and mentorship. She's also worked across different sectors such as technology, retail, aerospace, and consumer goods. So I'm really delighted to have our three panelists with us today. You're going to see their full bios in the chat. So if you're interested to know more about them, you can read the bios in the chat. And I'm actually going to pass it now to each one of our panelists to tell us more about their work experience and their insights about the work they do. I'm going to start first off with Lulwa, then I'm going to pass it to Sally, and then to Katisha. So Lulwa, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you for having me. So as Sarah said, I'm the talent acquisition operations manager at Lightspeed. For those of you who are not familiar with Lightspeed, we're a global tech company, and we provide cloud-based commerce solutions for businesses that are in retail and hospitality. Basically, we help these businesses grow, simplify, and scale their operations and grow their business. So as Sarah mentioned, I've been in recruitment for about 6-7 years in different scopes, in agency, in-house, in different industries. I've been a recruitment team lead, technical recruiter, and account manager. And I'm here today because I want to offer young professionals a bit more clarity about the hiring process and give you like kind of an behind the scene perspective about what employers are looking for and how you can show up with confidence and clarity, even though you're at the beginning of your career. So just briefly from the hiring side, a few things that matter. First, mindset over resume. Of course, your resume is important, but what we really remember is how you think, how you communicate, and how you carry yourself when you're interacting with the employer. A lot of hiring decisions are influenced by small moments that happen along the way. You know, every touch point that you have with the employer, every email, every question that you ask plays a factor in how they see you. So you have to remember that your story is very powerful. don't worry if your path is not traditional or you don't have experience. As Sarah mentioned, I know the expectations right now for young professionals is like to know everything, even though you just graduated. But what really matters is how you talk about the experience that you already have and what you've learned and where you want to go. So thank you again. I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into this conversation today and sharing what I've learned from both sides of the hiring process.
Thank you so much, Lilwa, for sharing that. And now I'm going to pass it to Sally.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sarah. I'm very happy to be here today. Sarah, thank you for sharing. She shared a lot about my background, so I will not go over that again, but I am the founder of Cultivate and Scale Coaching, which is a global coaching company. So I work with leaders, professionals, and teams globally. So my clients are in North America and across in the Middle East, where I worked for several years in Dubai as well. So I work with them, as Sarah did mention, building clarity, presence, strategic thinking, and how to navigate complex change environments. I'm really happy to be here today to share some perspectives in terms of what leaders are also looking for and how to invest in talent to really create opportunities for growth and long-term success. So really happy to be here with the other panelists, and thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sally. And now I'm going to pass it to you, Katisha, to talk more about your work.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for having me here today. So my name is Katisha, and I am currently an employment program coordinator at Elizabeth Fry Toronto. So in my role, I mainly support folks who come from equity-deserving communities, and I help them navigate employment barriers, help them with access to wraparound supports, and also helping them with working towards building confidence and sustainable careers. Another thing that I do is I also run an entrepreneurship training program called WEB, which stands for Women's Empowerment Through Business. And essentially, that's just because our target population has found entrepreneurship to be kind of one of those pathways that has a lot fewer external barriers than traditional employment. I've also had a chance to work across different spaces, so things like community programming, policy spaces, as well as entrepreneurship training, like I mentioned, which has really allowed me to see how there's a really big connection between access, equity, and long-term career growth. A lot of my work doesn't necessarily only center around making sure that people can get access to jobs, but also allowing them to be able to succeed once they're there. So that includes things like providing support with mentorship and trauma-informed support, and also connecting them to resources that they may not even realize exist out there. And yeah, I'm really passionate about creating spaces where people feel seen and capable and supported, especially those who've experienced hardship in life. And I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today because I honestly believe that employment can be a tool for healing and transformation when it's done correctly.
Thank you so much, Katisha, for sharing that. And if there are any resources that you would like to drop in the chat, please feel free to do so. And now we're gonna jump into our panel discussion with our three amazing panelists. And I'm gonna start with you, Sally, first, because I believe you bring a very unique perspective, the perspective of leaders. You've worked coaching leaders across different sectors, but also different geographies. So you definitely know where they stand, you know more about their own experiences and struggles as well. So when it comes to hiring or even promoting young talent within their organizations, what do you think those employers are actually prioritizing, like beyond what's on the resume, but also if someone's already working in an organization, what do they look for when they're looking at talent? Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. I think even Lilwa had mentioned when in recruitment, a lot of people are focused on, your resume, but your resume is really talking about what you did. And employers are trying to look at and leaders in terms of how you think, how you manage complexity, how you communicate, how you navigate ambiguity, particularly in these times. There's a lots of unpredictable things that transpire. It seems that people are moving more to focus on your skills versus your credentials. And so really being able to be adaptable and to have learning agility is going to be key. So how you can learn, unlearn, and relearn quickly. A lot of the times also there's a lot of pressure that people have. So how can you be comfortable navigating in an environment that's a bit ambiguous? It's going to be critical to you as well. So how can you take that initiative, that ownership, and try to make decisions with maybe not having all the information there, but feeling confident in terms of moving forward. I think the #1 ranked skill now and moving forward for the next several years is going to be analytical thinking. And so when people look at that, it's what does that mean? And it is your ability to break down complex issues into smaller, more manageable tasks, let's say, and make progress. So that's going to be key and critical moving forward, and how you can showcase your capability to do that. Some people think if they don't have a lot of experience, they can still showcase that through critical thinking, through things that they're learning on their own, through their agility. There's different ways to try to showcase how you can contribute. In the past, it used to be, are you going to fit in with our culture? Now it's more, how are you going to actually add value to our culture? And how can your perspective add something unique that will help us sort of catapult us to the next stage? Communication and collaboration also. So again, a lot of people are focused on AI, digital skills, technology. That's become the baseline. So the expectation is that you do have a certain capability there and you're going to continue to grow, but your real differentiator is going to be those human capabilities that you bring. And that's what leaders are looking for. Less authority sort of structures and more partnership. So bringing in people that are going to complement their skill sets. And like you said, across generations, there's different skills and capabilities. So focusing on how you communicate, how you collaborate across cultures, across functional teams, hybrid teams. So keeping those things in mind and being aware from, I mean, for me, emotional intelligence is something I focus very much with my different clients, and really having that self-awareness and having that reflection and understanding how your emotions show up and using that emotional information effectively is going to be key and support you in all those different areas. And I think really fundamentally, it's not letting setbacks really deter you. It's being in an environment where you feel that you can constantly have that growth mindset, feel safe to, experiment and learn what's going to help you move forward.
Thank you. Yeah, this is super interesting because here we're talking about like some of the essential skills that young people might need to work on, but these are more like people skills and kind of, like you said, focusing more on collaboration and communication, but also unlearning a lot of the things that you think you would need, but now you have to kind of adapt yourself to a new ecosystem, which is something very interesting to think about also for young people, how they present themselves and how they actually try to navigate the new challenges that are being thrown at them. And I guess this intergenerational thing is something they could actually try to use to their advantage rather than seeing it as a challenge, but actually to see how they could build bridges with these different generations. So this is definitely very interesting kind of summary of some of the essential skills that young people might need to cultivate and how to distinguish themselves. But if I want to take this even a step before that, so now we're talking more young people who are entering the job market or they are already in the job market. But Katisha, looking more closely at your work, and you work with equity deserving communities, there is significant work that has to happen before where we realize there are a lot of systemic barriers that are preventing a lot of communities to even get to that start line. So from your experience, what are those barriers, the ones that you've seen being the most kind of impactful on young people's ability to access and retain meaningful employment? And from your opinion, like, how can employers actually play a more significant role in removing those barriers? So here we're taking a step back. So even before even entering the job market, what are some of those barriers that we need to navigate and maybe to lessen them for certain communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my experience, I think one of the barriers that I've been seeing a lot, especially with the clients that I deal with my organization, would be honestly credentialism. I think a lot of employers still do prioritize formal education or really specific qualifications. And I know Sally mentioned that they're kind of steering away from that and looking beyond that, but it's still something that's pretty prevalent, especially for marginalized groups of people, because a lot of the times these young people, they don't necessarily have formal education, but they might have real life experiences or work experience or transferable skills or even just deep community knowledge that's honestly just as valuable but isn't necessarily prioritized the same way. I've also kind of noticed that there's a limited access to networks and mentorship. And that's kind of something that's really significant just because of the fact that a lot of the youth that I work with don't necessarily have people around them to help guide them through the unspoken rules of like the workplace or like professional culture. So even just like learning how to apply for jobs, learning where to find them, like connecting with people in that sense is pretty difficult because they don't necessarily have that guidance. And yes, there are programs and organizations that do provide that, like the ones that I work at, but at the same time, if you don't necessarily come from that background where you're exposed to all of that, you don't know exactly what you're missing. So those are some things I've also seen. Another one that unfortunately still does exist would probably be an unconscious bias. So there are things like names and like accents, appearances, or even just like communication styles that can lead to judgment, even discrimination. And that's still something that happens today, and even with all the progression that we have in society. I think there are still a lot of youth that are really qualified, but are passed over just because they don't necessarily look like the traditional worker, or they don't fit into that traditional mold. So I would think to remove some of these barriers, employers should rethink what they value, which again, I think Sally is kind of touching on as well. So I think that would mean to kind of hire based off of like potential and seeing the person as a whole, and like looking at some of those soft skills as well, not just like a super polished or technical resume. And I think like beyond that, it's really about creating support systems. So even just having more opportunities for young people to get into those spaces. So having like paid internships and like accessible mentorship, and even just culturally aware onboarding, so that young people can actually get their foot in the door and they actually feel like they have a place to belong and can grow in. So really it's at the end of the day, it's just about seeing people as whole people and just recognizing that success doesn't necessarily look the same for everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Katisha, for that. I think this is a very important point of view to highlight. And actually, I want to build on that with you, Lilwa, because you've heard what Katisha and Sally has shared, and you're someone who's on the inside, and you've had over 6 years working in recruitment spaces and kind of working with young talent. From someone who's on the inside, usually how do you think we could promote more inclusive hiring practices? And what are the strategies that employers should be adopting to reduce this bias and kind of creating more equitable pathways, building on what Katisha was saying, that not everyone's experience is the same. Sometimes it's really hard even to get your foot in the door. So what should organizations be doing in order to make more inclusive and equitable hiring practices and attract young people, especially those who are coming from such communities that are usually disadvantaged?
Thank you for your question. This is actually a topic that I'm personally very passionate about, so I'd love to get the chance to talk about it. And a lot of the things that Katisha said are very important. The main thing that employers need to understand, and it's very important, is that inclusive hiring does not happen by accident. It takes intentional work and intentional different strategies to be able to offer an environment that's fair to everyone and a chance that is fair to everyone. There are many things that companies are currently doing. Obviously, there's a lot more that can be done. It starts from rethinking the requirements for a certain position, and that's something that Sally also touched on, is that the culture changed of trying to find someone who fits the culture, and the focus is more on skills instead, especially with young professionals that haven't gotten the chance to build their experience as much as more experienced professionals. So what companies are doing they're using structured interviews to make sure that everyone gets the same fair chance and to reduce biases. It's very important to train continuously recruiters and hiring managers and offer training for them to recognize their unconscious bias and different types of biases that they're probably not aware of, and learn how to spot potential in non-traditional profiles that normally did not fit the traditional way of what we used to see as the right talent. In addition, it's very important, another thing that Katisha touched on, is offering paid internships and paid mentorships, because young professionals are looking for more guidance on what to do in their career. And if only unpaid opportunities exist, then many young people who are not able to afford it are left out. So paying them fairly is a key step in creating equity in the workplace. There are many other things. When you're an employer, it's very important that when you have this culture internally, that you make sure that your employer brand reflects this, and it reflects your commitment to inclusion. So what you can do is, there's many ways that employers are using social media, and as you said, young professionals are more tech savvy right now, and we live in a different world where social media and online videos, webinars like this, podcasts make a huge difference. They also allow employers to showcase that they have this environment where everyone can show up and feel like they're themselves and they don't have to change anything about themselves. They can feel that they belong before they apply. And even internally, after you're a part of the culture, you could see that there are many employee resource groups or employee-led networks for diverse groups, to create a sense of community and see that you're represented within the company. So basically, it's really changing and expanding what we see as talent, and not just hiring someone who fits the mold, but someone who's bringing in something new to the table. And as you see, like all the diverse workforce, you're bringing different perspectives from different cultures, and it's always creates a lot more creativity. One last thing that I can touch on is that you can build a lot of communication and a lot of like partnerships with colleges, with schools, and with diversity, equity, and inclusion organizations that focus on youth or even like more experienced professionals, and have events for recruitment to make sure that you are actually reaching that talent early on in their career.
Thank you, Lilwa, for that. I think the three of you really highlighted values and how you present yourself, and thinking more about the person, the character, not just the skills that you're acquiring. But realistically speaking, at the end of the day, we know that the youth unemployment rate is increasing. We know a lot of young people now are getting all these micro credentials. They're working on their education. They're working on different like skill sets and trying to keep up with all those changes. So even if we do say that, yes, employers are looking more closely at values, they're looking at reducing bias and have more diverse hiring. But Sally, I want to go back to you, because you've worked with leaders that were like navigating complex transitions and very challenging environments. But in concrete steps, if I'm a young person today, because this is something that we've seen as well, that many of them do aspire having more decision-making power and actually growing into those leadership roles. And many of them report that this is being hindered, or they're not even given this opportunity. But in concrete steps, if a young person today wants to reach that leadership position and an organization is supposed to support them in that, how can organizations do things differently in order to equip those young people with the skills needed, or at least maybe the values, like you said, or the mindset for them to actually reach those high stakes leadership roles, or to have more decision-making power? Because there's also this age bias sometimes, that if you're young, you're not perceived as being capable of taking on this decision-making. And there's also, again, a gender bias. Sometimes there's what Katisha was mentioning, if you're coming like as a newcomer or immigrant, there's also like a cultural bias into this, racial bias into this. So can you tell us more concretely how we can do things differently?
Yes. And I do agree. I think there's a lot of times organizations, it's a bit surface level in terms of having a commitment or a slogan that appeals to wider audiences, but really is the behavior being modeled and the practices in place. So I've heard, I mean, Katisha and Lilwa speak about it, and it's true. When I work with some expats that are moving into new markets and geographies, so people coming from abroad into this market for the first time, and I support entrepreneurs that are coming into the market for the first time. So you do see the issues and the barriers and the roadblocks faced that differ from one community to the next, and really understanding and generating opportunities for people to appreciate what everybody brings to the table is key. I think also not keeping employees siloed. So allowing young talent exposure to complexity early on, giving them that ability to work across teams, across cultures, across environments is not only a way to fuel and help their strategic thinking, but it's a way to understand and recognize other people. It helps with their communication and collaboration, and even in a way that can support them when conflict arises, when they need to, deal with issues that might be a little less comfortable, but allows them to grow and hone those skills more thoughtfully. So I think that early exposure to complexity is key. Two other things that were touched upon earlier were mentorship, which I think is extremely important. Again, the people that are getting involved in these are key. The leaders that I work with that are at the C-suite level, they have mentors, and they've had mentors through their whole career. So it's equally as important when you're beginning your career and throughout your career. So having those programs in a way where both the mentors are as committed is going to be key, and having talent comfortable to approach those mentors for different asks, whether it's open up your network, some advice, some guidance. And then I would say, on the other hand, also looking for sponsors. So as young talent, people that have exposure to what you've been able to do, what you've accomplished, and that are willing to advocate for you to get sort of that increased visibility in those roles is going to be key. So a lot of people sort of mix them up sometimes, but having both of those types of people that you can count on and you evolve. So you might not have the same mentor throughout, but you will, be able to deepen those relationships and leverage them for what you need. So I would say having those programs embedded, creating a psychologically safe environment that has been for years touted as a very key indicator to having good collective intelligence, having good collaboration within teams. And this is one of the areas where you do need to see the behavior modeled by the leaders. So it's one thing to say, oh, yes, we want to create this environment, but is it actually there? And how can talent themselves demonstrate some of that behavior that they want to see and create those pockets within an organization as well? So that's key in terms of allowing talent and young talent particularly to be able to express themselves, give feedback, offer their opinions without feeling that there's going to be any repercussion for that. But on the contrary, it's encouraged for sort of the collective good. And I would say, again, I know I mentioned this with the last time, but moving from an authority sort of model to more of a partnership. So leaders really looking to hire talent that they know are coming in with skills they don't have. And so recognizing that there's strength in that versus, having any sort of competitive sense is going to be key as well.
Yeah, I really like that, like modeling the behavior and thinking about a psychologically safe environment and the types of culture that you're actually building in your organization. So it's also not just preaching something, but also actually applying it and how you create those policies and those feedback processes for people, which takes me to you, Katisha, because we're talking here about hiring, entering the job market and all of that. But even going beyond the hiring, when we're talking about the organizational culture, what type of wraparound supports you think are also needed to help young people grow and thrive in their roles? And like, what could we be doing more effectively as organization? Like, where do you see the gap, and what do you see should be the kind of best practice in that space?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I've kind of seen in my experience, like when I'm supporting youth with like their programs or in entrepreneurial spaces, really success isn't just about landing a job. Like it's also about like what support exists around that job and the ability for the workplace to support people just beyond their workload. So realistically, in my opinion, I think mental health support has come up the most and it's probably the most critical. I think there's just so many youth out there that are dealing with like legitimate trauma and stress or just general instability outside of work or even just having like multiple overarching responsibilities and having access to like counseling support or even just like peer spaces or just like sessions where you can like be open and kind of like have a space to show up as yourself are actually really impactful and they allow people to show up more fully and consistently. I think another big one would probably be financial literacy and like flexible supports. So I think that's kind of an obvious one, just given the kind of state of economic climate that we're in right now. But I think even just like having small initiatives like transit stipends or like financial coaching, I think are ways that you can prevent like a young person from having to choose between paying a bill or like keeping a job. And those are some things that I've seen that are really impactful. Like for instance, in all the programs that we have, if there's ever an in-person component, we do provide transportation stipends for all of the clients, and that's something that has allowed people to honestly show up more meaningfully, just because they don't have that to worry about. And I mean, in the workplace, it's a little bit different. You might not be able to do the exact same thing, but just kind of showing that same level of support, I think, is really impactful. So I think that employers should be considering like non-conventional or potentially like less attractive benefits, such as ones that can support a person with their basic needs, over having things like maybe like a happy hour or like a holiday party or something. Because I think a lot of people are more focused on survival at this time, and I think those things would help a lot more. Another thing I would probably say again would be mentorship and continuous learning. I think this is probably another really big one. I think young people, they really just want to grow. They want feedback, they want more opportunities, and they want to feel like they're in a real workplace and feel like they're actually being considered. And so having a clear sense of where they're headed is also a big part of that. And I think when employers are investing in like upskilling and like promoting internal mobility, because that's something that we don't necessarily see as much anymore, they're not just retaining like their employees, but they're also showing that they want to build a long-term connection with them. And they're also showing that they actually believe in the skills and abilities of their young employees. So all in all, I think that like wraparound supports don't have to be complicated. They just need to be very intentional. And I think they need to be built within the real needs of the person in mind. And so that really just looks like, from a very general sense, it just looks like meeting people where they're at and using that to shape culture and policies and practices rather than just expecting a young person to stretch themselves to meet their expectations.
Thank you, Katisha. Before I move to the Q&A with the audience, I have a question for you, Lulwa. You've heard what both Katisha and Sally were talking about, and in your roles over time, like you had to deal with employers as well, and you know, like their type of frustrations and the things they say when they're looking for talent. So you have that perspective, but you also work on the other side with young talent and all of that. And we know there's this strong rhetoric about a disconnect between what employers are looking for and what young talent is actually looking for, or even have to offer. So, having both sides, can you tell us more about where this disconnect is coming from and how do we actually overcome it? Like, what are some, really meaningful ways where we could actually bridge that gap? And what is something that you're hearing from employers that you would like young people to know, especially as they present themselves for a job or if they want to grow within their careers?
Yeah, thank you for that question. This is definitely one of the major challenges that people face while looking for employment, and also the frustrations that sometimes employers have when they're, going through different types of interviews and not finding the right person. Especially, it's harder when you're trying to hire for an entry-level role and you have a lot of different candidates that have kind of the same level of experience. So it's basically important to work on both sides, because it is, and this has been mentioned now as we're talking, there is a certain level of expectations from the employer perspective that gets to the point where it's not very realistic to expect out of someone who just graduated. Some of the things that were, you going the extra mile are now like considered the basic thing. So it's hard for a candidate to differentiate themselves from the market, and it's very competitive out there right now because there are a lot of fresh graduates, a lot of educated people that are looking for roles. So maybe this is like from a recruiter's perspective, it's really coaching hiring managers on having the right expectations, but at the same time, how we can help candidates be able to show up is basically goes back to the same thing that we've been saying. It's not just about what you've done, it's also about how you present yourself and your skills. If you have not had the opportunity to have a formal position yet, but you've had internships, you've had part-time jobs as a student, you had a student club, anything that you've done in your early career, you were able to improve a process, you're able to like help a student club grow, whatever it is. It's really framing your answers when you show up to an interview. First, doing your research about what the role is, what the requirements are, and choosing examples from your experience that showcase how you're able to have like some transferable skills that you can implement. So Sally talked about analytical thinking. It's going to be very important that you showcase how you do problem solving, how you do critical thinking, how you think about approaching issues. So basically framing the situation, what you did to solve it, and then maybe what you learned from it. Showcasing adaptability, because you're going to be working in a very ambiguous environment sometimes, and you have to roll with what's going on. Just basically owning what you know and what you're willing to learn and what you're working on, and trying to show up, not really focusing on that. You don't need to have everything. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have all of those micro learnings that you do other on the side, like you mentioned. Everything, all of this helps, obviously, because it's a very competitive market and these skills are now the basics, but it's really more about your personality and how you're framing your storytelling of the things that you've done. Another very important thing is that you show curiosity. You mentioned at the beginning that sometimes people start a role and then they leave 6 months later because it's not what they expected. So a portion of it is on the employer side because they're only showing usually what's the best part about working at a company, and they're not always honest. But on your side as a candidate, what you can do is ask as many questions as you can. Really make sure that it's a kind of a two-way interview. Don't start the role before really understand what it is. It also shows that you're engaged, you're eager, and you want to grow and you want to understand the company. And this minimizes, you having to leave after 6 months because you didn't really understand what you're getting into. So it's kind of from both sides. I think what would help is that just showing up with a mindset of continuous learning, showing that you are ready to approach challenges and showing how you can, learn from feedback and how you can stay motivated. And another topic that was mentioned about how leadership is one of the main reasons where people leave roles. I find it also very interesting when candidates, whether it's a early career professional or a more experienced professional, bring up that conversation in an interview about the type of leadership that they expect or that they would want to know more about how the leader like what leadership style they have. This also helps you when you're coming into a new opportunity to really know, if it's a good fit or what you need to do for it to work. So just, be honest and make sure that you present everything that you've done in a way that's connected to the role that you're trying to apply for.
Thank you so much, Lilwa. I want to thank our 3 panelists for those insights. Like we talked about values, how to present yourself, how to distinguish yourself. There's a lot that goes into your character, personality. It's not just about getting the credentials and the degrees. It's really trying to get this real life experience, and everything counts as an experience as highlighted. So if you're in a club or if you're working as a co-op or even your volunteering experience, it's really trying to support especially communities that have barriers to enter that job. So organizations also have to reevaluate their policies and what type of pathways they're putting forward. We also talked a bit about leadership styles and how leaders are supposed to model the best behavior, especially when they claim that an organization is really promoting mentally and psychologically safe environments, providing wraparound supports for young people, because their life is not just about the job. They also have to worry about affordability, their commuting, if they're gonna eat today or not, how do they get to the job, a lot of obstacles. So there's a lot to unpack, and we can go on for hours on this topic, because I think we hear a lot about these narratives in the media. We hear a lot about it in policy circles, at the city level, at the provincial governmental level, in community organizations that are providing employment services, even governmental services. A lot of times people don't even know where to start, how to get a mentor, how to connect on LinkedIn, how to present themselves, where do they go for these resources. So there's a lot of awareness building that has to happen. I'm going to move for the Q&A with the audience, just to see if you have any questions that haven't been covered in this discussion. If we don't manage to answer a question live, the panelists can type an answer if they have an answer for that. Otherwise, you could connect with them on LinkedIn. We do have one question in the Q&A. I think this one mostly goes to you, Sally. And I think we covered a lot of this, but in case you have any additional thoughts. So it was mentioned in the presentation that leadership is one of the main reasons that does not motivate youth to work. So do you have any recommendations on these? So any additional thoughts on how leadership should be shifting, or what employers or leaders should be doing differently? Something that you haven't addressed before that you'd like to add as a final thought as well?
Well, I think, we're focused a lot on what young talent can do, but it's the same for people in leadership positions. So that continuous learning, that curiosity, that understanding that they need to adapt and become more familiar with what people are bringing to the table these days is just as critical. So we do see a lot of the times that it's more difficult to sort of incite that change later. So it's being conscious of that and making that effort to continuously seek feedback regardless of the level you're at. And I would say for the talent, don't put barriers for yourself. Take the risk and see what opportunities lie.
That's great, Sally. Thank you for that. Lilwa, there's a question for you. and I think this resonates with a lot of people, is how would I be able to convince my direct managers and the importance of my personal career development in my current job? So a lot of young people also reported that sometimes they lack those growth opportunities or professional development opportunities in their jobs. So how can they actually engage in this conversation now that we're talking about leadership, dynamics, things like that?
Yeah, so the question is talking about like the individual's career development in the same role without, you know, having to like get a promotion. Like, how do you develop within your role? That's the question, right? So basically what I've seen and personally experienced as someone who's working in the job market is that there's two portions to this. It's showing interest from your side of wanting to grow beyond the scope of your role and showing initiative and ownership of different things that you can do to add value to your role as it is, and then grow beyond that role. So it does take a lot from the person to own this process, because you could always ask your manager to give you more tasks, but if you're not really the one who's taking initiative to learn and own that, you're not going to be able to grow. But it's also from, as Sally said, it's also from the manager's perspective, being able to be more humble, getting feedback, and also understanding that if you hire someone who basically has a different skill set or something more to offer than what you know, that would help. So basically empowering that person to be able to showcase that and giving them all the opportunities that they can have to showcase that type of improvement. So it's from both sides, you showing interest, you doing the work, showing initiatives. Like I've grown a lot in different roles in my career, and the way I was able to grow from one role to the other is I would basically start doing the role and showcase that I have the skills for it before I'm able to do it. But at the same time, I was lucky to have leaders and mentors that offered me the space to do that and offered me the mentorship that I needed to do that. So it goes from both sides.
Thank you, Lilwa. We have two final questions because I know we're running out of time, and I think those two can be connected, from Yobi and Jade. These are like, Katisha, this goes to you, but also Sally and Lilwa, feel free to weigh in. So this really talks about, should the job search be reformed? Because there are certain skills also that you need to have in order to get the job, like be able to search for the right job for you. And Jade's comment is also about, how do you build your network? Like what type of networking skills you need? Like how do you start? So if Katisha, you can start us off, and then Lulua and Sally, just your thoughts on that. And Elijah has a question in the Q&A. So if one of the panelists would like to type their answers to that one, because I don't think we're going to have the time to answer it live. But yeah, if you can give us some thoughts on that, Katisha, Sally, and then Lulua, before we wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the job search process and reforming it, I don't necessarily think it's something that has to be changed so much, but I do think you should rethink the way that you're looking at it. So I think being more open-minded to the different opportunities that are out there is something that you can start with. I think sometimes, especially as a younger person or someone who's just like coming out of post-secondary, we really have like tunnel vision as to and I think that tunnel vision kind of stops us from like looking beyond what's out there. I think even just in my experience, I didn't necessarily know that I would be doing the job that I do now, but that doesn't necessarily mean this isn't suitable for my career or match my educational background. So I think just having that open mind and looking for opportunities beyond what you expect is beneficial. And I think you'll kind of find out that there's a lot more opportunities out there. I also think relying heavily on your community resources is also pretty helpful, especially when you're trying to build a network and you don't necessarily have access to that personally. Joining webinars like this and talking to professionals is a great way to get connected with people, to kind of add some insights and experience. Also, just joining different programs. There are a lot of programs across the city, especially in Toronto, that support you with developing professional skills or just being able to connect with people who may be in your field. So attending events, networking, connecting with people that way. Even if you just do it in more of a social sense, you never know when those connections will be able to benefit you later on. And especially if you don't necessarily have that access, I think just putting yourself out there, as daunting as it can be at times, is really helpful. So I'll leave it at that so I can have Sally and Lala say something, but those are some things I'd recommend.
Sally, in one sentence, final thoughts on that? Networking skills, job search skills, and any final concluding thoughts?
I would say for networking, don't allow yourself to be overwhelmed by the concept of reaching out to someone that you don't know. Write down what your intro might be. It's not something that you need to send, but make it something more digestible to you and really look at what the possible scenarios are. If the person doesn't engage with you, that's okay. It wouldn't have been the right match for you. But setting a target for yourself, if you are just starting out, or Jade, you mentioned that you're going into your last year, finding people that you do find inspirational, or that have been doing it for a couple of years, reach out. Put a target for yourself. Is it once a month? That might be too often, that you want to reach out to someone outside of your standard network. And how can you then, start to build that skill to feel comfortable? And a lot of them it's informational sharing. It's not necessarily you asking for something. So how can you create more comfort between you and yourself in making that a habit?
Thank you, Sally. Lulwa, any concluding thoughts on that or final input before we wrap up?
She said exactly what I wanted to say. Don't be afraid to reach out. I know it can be daunting sometimes to reach out to someone who you don't really know, but it could be really helpful. You could get a lot of different, mentorship insights, and also it's about knowledge sharing. So Sally said it perfectly. I don't really have anything to add to that. Just also try to attend as many events as you can that are networking, because you never know, sometimes knowing the right person who has seen this side of you that's eager and willing to learn can be a reference to go, to a very exciting opportunity.
Thank you so much. And I see, Lilwa, you're answering Elijah's question about are there any fresh topics you wish more organization would start offering to support youth in their job hunts? So please feel free to add any thoughts about that. I want to thank our three amazing panelists today, Katisha, Lilwa, and Sally. I think you brought forward different perspectives, experiences at the leadership level, employer level, recruitment, community services, working across different audiences. And I think people who attended today left with a lot of food for thought and things that they can start applying in their real life. And we do hope that slowly but surely we're able to support young people in growing their careers and removing those access barriers for them. I'm going to wrap up our webinar for today with a final kind of next step slide. And thank you so much. Sorry for going a bit over time, but I think there's a lot to cover for today. So in terms of next step, will be launching soon a real affordability index. So which city is the most affordable for young people in Canada? I'm going to leave you guessing which one that is. So stay tuned. And if anyone is interested to partner with us on that index, please reach out to me directly. As I mentioned in our presentation, all the data and research findings are in Youth Data Lab. So if you work at policy level, if you're working even as an educator or at any level, public, private sector, you can use this data for your line of work. We have our upcoming webinar next week, same time on Tuesday, the 15th. The future of work is human, mental health, and culture at work, where we will be talking more about mental health and thinking more closely about disability inclusion in workplaces. And finally, if you have an idea or just want to have a conversation, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today, and feel free to connect with our panelists on LinkedIn, and looking forward to seeing you all in our next webinar. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.